The crowd was still roaring in Eddie Van Halen's ears as he walked off stage at the Forum in Inglewood, California. It was March 27, 1982, and Van Halen had just finished the final show of their Hide Your Sheep tour. 22,000 people had screamed themselves hoarse, watching Eddie's fingers fly across the Frankenstrat, watching him make sounds that shouldn't have been possible on a guitar. But now, at 1:30 in the morning, Eddie was exhausted, drenched in sweat, and absolutely starving. He wasn't alone. His bassist, Michael Anthony, was there, along with two session musicians who'd been helping with the new album. One was Marcus Johnson, a 41-year-old keyboardist from Detroit, who could make a synthesizer sing in ways that were reshaping Van Halen's sound. The other was James "Jimmy" Patterson, a 35-year-old percussionist from Oakland, whose Latin-influenced rhythms were giving their hard rock edge a completely new dimension. These two men had been working with Van Halen for 8 months, and in that time, they'd become more than hired musicians. They'd become family. Before we continue with what happened that night, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this story reveals a side of Eddie Van Halen that the rock world tried to bury. Marcus and Jimmy had been there during the brutal recording sessions for what would become Diver Down, staying up until dawn in Sunset Sound Studios, while Eddie obsessively tweaked every note, every tone, every millisecond of delay. They'd watched him nearly destroy a priceless guitar in frustration when he couldn't get the sound exactly right. Marcus had taught Eddie chord voicings from jazz that no metal guitarist was supposed to know. Jimmy had shown him percussion techniques that made Eddie rethink how he approached rhythm guitar. They'd shared hotel rooms, tour buses, greasy truck stop food, and stories about their families back home. They weren't just session players. They were brothers. But this was 1982 in Los Angeles, and despite all the progress people claimed had been made since the 60s, there were still places where the color of your skin mattered more than the content of your character or the size of your talent. Sha Antoine was the most exclusive restaurant in West Hollywood. It was the kind of place where movie stars and record executives made deals over $100 steaks. Eddie had eaten there dozens of times. The owner, Antoine Rousseau, a French immigrant who'd opened the restaurant in 1975, always made a big show of greeting Eddie personally, of giving him the best table, of sending over complimentary champagne. "Come on, guys," Eddie said, as their limousine pulled up to the elegant brick building with its signature green awning. "You haven't lived until you've tried Antoine's steak. Best in Los Angeles, I guarantee it. And trust me, after that show we just killed, we've earned it." Marcus and Jimmy exchanged glances in the back of the limo. They'd been down this road before, in Detroit, in Oakland, in a dozen other cities where their talent opened doors, but their skin color slammed them shut again. "Eddie," Jimmy said carefully, his voice quiet, "maybe we should hit that all-night diner on Sunset instead." "Nonsense," Eddie interrupted, already out of the limo. "I'm buying dinner for my band, and we're going to the best place in town. You guys just helped me create magic on that stage tonight. You deserve champagne and steak, not greasy diner food." The moment they walked through the heavy wooden doors, the entire restaurant seemed to freeze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. Every head turned to stare at the four men standing in the doorway. Two white, two black. The maitre d', a thin man in his 50s named Pierre, looked like he'd just swallowed something bitter. He recognized Eddie immediately, but his gaze kept darting between Eddie and his companions, then toward the kitchen. "Monsieur Van Halen," Pierre said, his French accent suddenly much thicker than usual. "What a pleasure to see you again. However, I'm afraid we are fully booked this evening. Perhaps if you had called ahead. Fully booked? Eddie interrupted, gesturing at the half-empty dining room. Pierre, I can see at least 6 empty tables from here. Come on, man, table for 4. We're celebrating. Pierre's face flushed red. Monsieur Van Halen, perhaps you and your white companion could be seated, but I'm afraid— Wait, Eddie said, his smile fading. What did you just say? From the kitchen, Antoine Rousseau emerged. He was a large man in his late 50s with silver hair and an expression that tried to be apologetic, but came across as condescending. Eddie, my friend, Antoine said, his arms spread wide. You know how much we love having you here. You are always welcome at Sha Antoine, always. But you must understand, we have a certain clientele, a certain atmosphere we must maintain. Your colored friends, perhaps they would be more comfortable at one of the establishments on the other side of town. Colored friends? Eddie repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. The restaurant was so silent now that you could hear ice melting in water glasses. Every customer was watching, waiting to see what Eddie Van Halen would do when confronted with elegant racism wrapped in a French accent. Eddie looked at Antoine, then at the wealthy diners, then back at Marcus and Jimmy. His jaw tightened in a way that Michael Anthony recognized as barely controlled fury. Marcus put a hand on Eddie's shoulder. It's okay, Ed. We'll grab something back at the hotel. We're used to this. Those 4 words, we're used to this, hit Eddie like a physical blow. Used to being turned away despite their talent, their success, their humanity. Used to being told they weren't welcome. Eddie thought about all the times Marcus and Jimmy had made excuses about not joining him for dinner after recording sessions. They'd been protecting him from this ugly truth, shielding him from the reality they lived with every single day. They're used to this, Eddie repeated slowly, his voice tight with emotion. These men are musicians, Antoine. Artists. They're my friends. They just spent 8 hours in the studio with me creating something beautiful. And you're telling me they can't eat at the same table as me because of the color of their skin? I don't make the rules of society, Eddie, Antoine said defensively. This is simply how things are. We have standards to maintain. You want to eat here? You are welcome anytime. But your companions must leave, or I'm afraid I must ask all of you to go. What happened in the next 30 seconds would change Eddie Van Halen's life forever. Eddie walked up to the maitre d's station, where a telephone sat next to the reservation book. He picked it up and dialed a number while everyone watched in stunned silence. The call lasted exactly 1 minute and 43 seconds. Yeah, it's Eddie. Sha Antoine on Sunset. They're refusing service to Marcus and Jimmy. Because they're black, that's why. I need you to make some calls. Every reporter you know. I want this on the front page of the LA Times by tomorrow morning. When he hung up, Eddie turned to face Antoine and the entire restaurant full of wealthy people who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. I was born in the Netherlands, Eddie said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent restaurant. My family came to America in 1962 with $700 and a dream. We were immigrants. We were different. We spoke broken English. Kids made fun of us. They told us to go back where we came from. My father worked as a janitor. My mother was a maid. And you know what? Some restaurants wouldn't serve us either because we were foreigners, because we didn't fit their idea of what Americans should look like. He paused, making sure every person was listening. So I know exactly what it feels like to be judged for where you come from instead of who you are. And I swore that when I made it, I would never let that happen to anyone around me. These two men are the reason the new Van Halen album is going to blow people's minds. They're the reason I can afford to eat anywhere I damn well please. And if they're not good enough for this restaurant, then neither am I. Eddie turned to his bandmates. Gentlemen, we're leaving. We'll find somewhere that serves good food to good people. But he turned back to Antoine one more time. And that phone call I just made? That was to every music journalist I know. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Los Angeles is going to know that Sha Antoine refuses to serve the musicians who made Van Halen's new album. Good luck keeping your tables full when the entire rock and roll community knows what kind of establishment you really run here. They walked out, leaving behind a restaurant full of stunned customers. As they walked to the limousine, none of them spoke. Marcus was shaking. Jimmy had tears running down his face. Michael Anthony looked like he'd just watched his best friend become someone even more worthy of respect. When they got to the limo, Eddie leaned against it, breathing hard, his hands trembling from adrenaline. You didn't have to do that, Marcus said quietly. Eddie, you really didn't have to. That's where deals get made. You just burned a major bridge. Yes, I did have to do that, Eddie interrupted, his voice firm. I absolutely did. How can I stand on stage and play music influenced by black artists, by blues musicians, by jazz players, and then let someone treat you like you're not even human? If I can't eat with you, I don't deserve to play with you. It's that simple. Jimmy stepped forward and embraced Eddie. Then Marcus joined. Then Michael Anthony. And the four of them stood there under the streetlights of Sunset Boulevard, holding each other like brothers who'd just survived a battle together. The real impact. The next morning, the story exploded across Los Angeles. Van Halen guitarist walks out of exclusive restaurant over racism, read the LA Times headline. Some praised him as a hero. Others condemned him as naive. Within a week, Eddie had lost 2 major endorsement deals. A planned collaboration with a prominent producer fell through. Warner Brothers executives called emergency meetings about damage control. Eddie's manager was livid. You've just cost yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars. Was it worth it? Eddie didn't hesitate. Yes. Absolutely yes. But here's what the worried executives didn't expect. For every endorsement deal Eddie lost, he gained 2 with companies that admired his stand. For every producer who refused to work with him, 3 more called offering their services. For every fan who claimed they'd never buy another Van Halen album, 10 new fans started buying their entire back catalog. The younger generation made Eddie their hero. Black musicians who'd never felt fully accepted in the hard rock world suddenly had a white ally who'd put his reputation on the line. Within a month, Van Halen's album sales had increased by 40%. Diver Down, released 2 months later, shot straight to number 3 on the Billboard charts. MTV put Van Halen into heavy rotation, and VJs made sure to mention Eddie's stand when introducing the videos. But the real change happened in Los Angeles. Within 3 months, 17 high-end restaurants in the city quietly changed their policies. They simply started seating customers regardless of color. They'd seen what happened when you turned away Eddie Van Halen's friends, and they'd done the math. Antoine Rousseau held out for 2 years, but his customer base slowly eroded. Musicians stopped going. Actors who worked with musicians stopped going. Business dropped 75%. In August 1984, Antoine quietly sold the restaurant. Sha Antoine became the Sunset, room under new ownership with new policies. Eddie never publicly gloated. When a reporter asked about it, he said, "I'm sad it came to that. Antoine made good food. He just forgot that good food should be for good people, all people." Marcus and Jimmy continued working with Van Halen for 3 years. Eddie made sure they were credited properly, paid equally, treated with respect everywhere. When Marcus's divorce was finalized, Eddie loaned him $15,000 and refused to accept repayment. When Jimmy's daughter wanted to attend Berkeley's music program, Eddie paid her full tuition for 4 years, anonymously. Years later, in a 1992 Rolling Stone interview, Marcus Johnson was asked about that night. "Eddie could have left us outside that restaurant," Marcus said, his voice still carrying emotion. "He could have gone in, eaten his steak, and nobody would have blamed him. That was just how things were in certain circles. But Eddie said, 'If they're not good enough for this restaurant, then neither am I.' That's when I knew I wasn't working for Eddie Van Halen, the guitar player. I was working with Eddie Van Halen, the human being." Today, there's a small plaque at the Sunset Room that reads, "On this site in March 1982, Eddie Van Halen took a stand for equality and friendship that changed West Hollywood dining forever. In his honor, all are welcome here." Eddie Van Halen walked into that restaurant as one of the most famous guitarists in the world. He walked out as something more, a man who proved that fame means nothing if you don't use it to stand up for what's right. He lost endorsement deals and business relationships, but he gained something worth infinitely more: his integrity, self-respect, and the loyalty of people who understood that true greatness isn't measured in album sales or sold-out arenas. It's measured in moments when you choose courage over comfort, speaking up over silence, principles over profit. If this story of courage moved you, subscribe and share this video. Have you ever stood up for someone when everyone else stayed silent? Let us know in the comments.